Good morning, Honors U.S. History. All right, rise and shine. We are here to do the Industrialists, Captains of Industry, or robber barons. All right, sophomores, welcome to your first day of distance learning, sponsored by your good old pal COVID-19. All right, let's do this thing. The Industrialists, Captains of Industry, or robber barons. You be the judge. All right, well, the argument is established like this. Either they are the captains of industry, leaders in the community, people who are generally good, nice humanitarians, or they are robber barons who are basically out there to soak every dollar they can and, leave all kinds of bodies in their wake. So you see a couple lists here of the pro argument, captains of industry, and those individuals might fall into those criteria. And then on the right, the con argument, the robber barons argument, and people describing those. So let's look at a few of these guys, and you be the judge of where they stack out. Okay. Cornelius Vanderbilt, from 1794 to 1877, he was an American entrepreneur, wealth in shipping and in railroads. Fortune estimated at more than 100 million. He willed 95 million to his son William, but only 500,000 to each of his 8 daughters. His wife received $500,000 in cash, their modest New York City home, and 2,000 shares of common stock in New York Central Railroad. Great guy. Philanthropy. He gave little of his vast fortune to charitable works, leaving the million, the equivalent of about 19 million today. He promised for Vanderbilt University, which bears his name. He had promised for Vanderbilt University and $50,000 for a church in New York City. He lived modestly, leaving his descendants to build the Vanderbilt houses that characterize America's Gilded Age. Speaking of the Vanderbilt house, this is what we're talking about here. This is Biltmore in North Carolina, and you can go online and see all of the cool stuff that has inside. It's a pretty swanky dive. All right. Moving on. Jay Gould, 1836 to 1892, American financier, became a leading railroad developer and speculator. Had a reputation of being very ruthless and unscrupulous and cutthroat. Many times he allowed his rivals to believe that he was down and out, only before springing some kind of trap on them. Was said that he absolutely had no scruples about using stock manipulation and insider trading, legal then but illegal now, to build capital and to execute or prevent hostile takeovers of his companies. As a result, many businessmen did not trust him. However, he earned high praise from John D. Rockefeller, who named him as the most skilled businessman he had ever encountered. Jay Gould, you see here, featured on one of the cigarette cards that you would have found in tobacco products at the time. Okay. Andrew Carnegie, Scottish-born American industrialist. In the 1870s, he founded the Pittsburgh Carnegie Steel Company. By 1890s, the company was the largest and most profitable industrial enterprise in the world. He sold it to J.P. Morgan's U.S. Steel in 1901 for a tidy sum of about $250 million. He devoted the rest of his life to large-scale philanthropy and large-scale emphasis on local libraries, world peace, and scientific research. Wrote a book in 1889 called The Gospel of Wealth and began to go around giving pep talks and infomercial style talks about how you too can be wealthy, selling the book and trying to encourage people to live a good moral life and to work hard and be successful. Okay? Carnegie was also known for his work in the business world, specifically pioneering vertical and horizontal integration. Vertical integration is where you buy up all your competition. So you are basically making sure that you produce all of the product that you can. And the way you go about getting that competitive advantage so you can put your partners out of business and buy up their capacity is through vertical integration. For instance, let's say you are producing steel. Well, part of the cost of producing steel is transporting the steel to the factory. So how about we buy some railroads? That way we transport our own steel. We reduce costs. Great. But it also involves coal and iron ore. So Carnegie would go out and buy iron mines, and then he would buy coal mines, and that way he could provide cheap iron ore and coal through his own and ship it through his own network to his own factories, and therefore he would reduce the cost of his product. And others could not compete with those kind of cost reductions. They went out of business. He bought up their share of the business, and that's how Carnegie basically got a monopoly on the steel industry. All right. Andrew Carnegie was, like I said, he produced this book called The Gospel of Wealth. Its topic was responsibility, philanthropy by the new lower class of self-made rich, the problem, the danger of allowing large sums of money to be passed into the hands of persons or organizations ill-equipped to mentally or emotionally cope with them. And so the solution, the wealthy entrepreneur must assume the responsibility of distributing his fortune in a way that it be put to good use and not wasted or on frivolous expenditures. In other words, and today we have a lot of wealthy individuals like Bill Gates and the Oracle of Omaha. I can't remember his name. But anyway, very rich individuals today who are giving away most of their inheritance, or they plan to give away most of their wealth and not leave a large inheritance for their children. So they believe that, just like Andrew Carnegie did, that the best use of their wealth is not to give it away to their family when they die, but to make sure it's doing good in their lives here and now. The goal of this very existence, the very existence of poverty in a capitalist society, should be negated by wealthy philanthropic businessmen and women. So that was his goal of writing the book, The Gospel of Wealth. Carnegie left his name on a lot of things. First of all, he was a big believer in reading in libraries, and so he funded thousands of libraries. He also, Concert Hall, Carnegie Hall has his name on it. Carnegie Mellon University has his name on it. And so he was incredibly rich, but he was also incredibly generous with his money. And so you can get an idea of how much money Andrew Carnegie made, here's an infographic of the wages of Joe Steelworker, $10 a week equal $1 and the wages of Andrew Carnegie, $40,000 a week equal all of these dollar signs. Big money. Moving on, J.P. Morgan was an American financier, banker, philanthropist, and art collector who dominated the corporate finance and industrial consolidation during this time. In 1892, Morgan arranged a merger through General Electric and the Edison General Electric and the Thomas Houston Electric Company to form the company General Electric. And he also undersaw several other mergers, including the Carnegie Steel Company, and he bequeathed a large art collection to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City when he died. Now you guys have all seen this guy. You know who this guy is, or at least you know a guy who's modeled after this guy. Anybody who has played The game Monopoly has seen rich Uncle Pennybags, who is based on J.P. Morgan. Yes, that's the dude right there. Um, so, rich Uncle Pennybags, J.P. Morgan. However, um, it's not exactly like J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan actually had a disfiguring facial condition that, and he hated being photographed because of it. That disfigured his nose, made his nose red and bulbous and kind of grotesque. And so, when he had his pictures taken, he often had his nose touched up, and you can kind of see it in this picture. I mean, if you weren't looking for it, it looks pretty normal, but because we know of his condition, and because you can see his big bulbous nose here, and then you see that it's absent there, we know that those photos were touched up. They were Photoshop before Photoshop was a thing. Aight. Last but certainly not least, John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller was an American industrialist and philanthropist, revolutionized the petroleum industry by basically buying out its competition by producing petroleum as cheaply as possible. In 1870, he founded the Standard Oil Company, and he ran it until he retired in the late 1890s. He kept the stock, and as gasoline grew more important because of the automobile, his wealth was growing like crazy. And he is regarded as the richest person in American history and the first person to be an actual U.S. dollar billionaire ever. For philanthropy, he spent the last 40 years of his life in retirement using philanthropy in areas of medicine, education, and scientific research. You know Rockefeller from 30 Rock. 30 Rock, 30 Rockefeller Center, which is where they film NBC and the Today Show and lots of other places. Rockefeller Center is a very well-known spot in New York City. You see the big Christmas tree there. There's a skating rink, I believe, there in front. 19 commercial buildings covering 22 acres between 48th and 51st Streets in New York City, built by the Rockefeller family, and is the center of Midtown Manhattan. And it is some incredibly expensive real estate. And it'd be nice to have that in the family because that's a nice little moneymaker for you. All right. That is all. That's what we have. We have covered the industrialists. And it's up to you to decide, captains of industry or robber barons. Thanks for playing. Have a great rest of the day.